we're talking about AI bubble today, right? And get different perspectives on it. I've got my perspective prepared, but before we get into that, I just wanted to play. I've got 4 clips from last week's episode because we had on AI outcomes Philip Johnston, CEO, co-founder, CEO of StarCloud, who came on the podcast, and then like the next day he had Elon Musk responding to his tweet. Harvey, everybody, Eric Schmidt. I was just looking on X. Everyone was responding to Philip because well, we were just so lucky. We managed to bag this interview with him the day before the press release went out about the Nvidia H100 GPU up in orbit. First time they've had a Nvidia H100 up in orbit, and just got super lucky with timing. I suspect if I'd been 2 days later, Philip might have had 1 or 2 other people to speak to. But anywho, we got there. So Thomas, if that's okay with you, we'll take a little look back at that. And I think that does link up with Bubble on the AI side of things as well.
Please, yeah. I haven't seen the podcast. I'm super interested in getting this.
All right. What I'll do is I'll go 4 clips. Each clip, I'll pause. We can have a little reaction to it. Keen to get your perspective. And let's go to clip number 1.
So yeah, we're companies called StarCloud. We're building orbital data centers initially to provide cloud and edge compute to other satellites, and then later to compete with terrestrial data centers on energy costs, essentially. So really, we're running up against these huge constraints on energy and water from terrestrial data centers. I think lots of towns and cities are now rejecting huge data center proposals in their neighborhoods for the reasons of they don't want strain on the power grid and on the water supply. And so, yeah, what we're doing is solving that constraint essentially.
So let me stop it there. As a problem statement, I love the simplicity of the problem statement, albeit the solution to it incredibly complex. But power and water, Thomas, 2 themes of the AI revolution already, and we're in like year 1 and a bit, aren't we? Really?
Yeah. So I'm not sure if I should play devil's advocate a little bit here. And I don't know if you know that I worked in a company called Orbital in the space industry for a while, which I think was still one of the highlights in my career. Fascinating stuff. And a lot of young people are going into the space industry, which is great to see. And then during my HPE time, we also had one of our servers on the International Space Station, which was also very interesting subject. So what he mentioned is right. I mean, the strain on the grid, the water supply issue, you can now see some of these data centers from space. They're so big and so vast, and that causes problems. So yeah, naturally the thinking is, why not go to space? No taxes, a lot of real estate, unfiltered solar energy. I mean, what would stop you from putting everything into space? But of course, there are some problems, which I don't know if he addressed it in his podcast. That would be very interesting.
Yeah, let me go. We did, and I've got one of those clips specifically around heat dissipation, which is the biggest problem. But let's go to clip number 2. Let me hit play.
We started on this 2 years ago. We started initially looking at space-based solar, and then realized if there was a cheap way of getting the energy consumption part to space, and that is data centers for most new energy projects on Earth, then you could solve one of the biggest problems with space-based solar. Space-based solar is where you have huge solar panels and you try and beam that power down, but you lose most of the power in transmission. Whereas if you can move that data center to space, then you can consume almost all of that power. We've just launched our first spacecraft. It has the first Nvidia H100 GPU or AI chip in it. It's about 100 times more powerful AI compute than has been in space before. And we've done a whole bunch of firsts on that. So we've just trained the first LLM. We've done the first, running the first version of Gemini in space on that spacecraft.
Fantastic.
And we'll be soon running high-powered inference on SAR data in collaboration with various DOW entities.
So there we go. 2 years since the inception of the company StarCloud, and yeah, I guess it's a big shout out, and Philip does this with regularity, to Y Combinator. Out of that program, so many big tech companies have kind of started small and just grown massively. But there you go, Thomas. They've achieved something very special in such a short amount of time.
Yeah, no, I read about I think it's the H100 GPU that's running with StarCloud now in space. He mentioned training a large language model. I was a bit surprised. I don't think they have the capacity in space right now to train a whole language model. So yeah, I guess it's just a matter of time. But he mentioned dissipating heat, right? Convection doesn't work, conduction doesn't work. The only thing that works is radiation. And you need these huge radiation panels up there, which I'm sure they are capable of adding to the data centers in order to dissipate the heat and
Yeah,
cool it down.
let me just go and play clip 3 of 4, which is purely about that, the biggest challenge that they are facing. Let's go to my slideshow. It's the heat dissipation, and the dissipation of a data center is a data center is super, super hot. We have cooling issues here on planet Earth, right? That's the whole, back to the whole energy driver and liquid cooling and the impact on the environment.
Yeah. So the way that a terrestrial data center keeps cold is you either blast air past the chips, or you're essentially evaporating off fresh water, so you can have direct-to-chip liquid cooling, and then that fresh water goes out to a cooling tower, which is most often is just evaporating fresh water. So you don't have air or fresh water in space, and so you need a new way of doing that. So you don't have convection or conduction, essentially. And the way that you do that is you need a large surface area that essentially glows in infrared. Everything in the world is glowing in infrared. Like if you had a heat camera on your face right now, you'd see that your face is glowing in infrared.
Yeah, I'll bet.
And what that just means is you're just emitting energy in infrared, basically, into deep space. So yeah, that's what we do. We need to keep a large surface area at a certain temperature, and then that will emit that infrared.
And why is that difficult?
It's difficult because large surface areas need to be folded up for launch, and then they need to deploy. And so you can imagine you've got all this piping for a fluid which is going to go past the chips and then out to this large surface area. And so all of that piping needs to fold up and then expand out to this much larger surface area once we get in orbit.
And so when I look at the kind of graphics and the animation on the StarCloud website, and you're seeing this giant expanse of, well, I think 4 kilometers by 1 kilometer. Is that the infrared, or is that the solar?
So the 4 kilometers by 4 kilometers is the solar, and then 4 kilometers by 1 kilometer is the radiator on the back of that image there. And so, yeah, you can think of it roughly 1 square meter of solar panel, it can produce about 200 watts per square meter in space, and 1 square meter of radiator can dissipate about 800 watts per square meter, maybe slightly less. And so if your surface area on the radiator is a quarter the size of on your solar panel, then that trade-off roughly works.
So let's stop that there. There you go. That's the heat dissipation. And technically, yeah, when something is going to be 4 kilometers by 1 kilometer up in space, and the solar panel's even bigger, you can start seeing the challenge, but you can start seeing how there's probably a solution to that challenge, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's certainly a challenge that eventually they will solve. The other challenges I see is definitely jurisdiction and security. I don't know if that was mentioned. I mean, who owns space? And if something goes wrong up there, I mean, can you fix everything remotely? Or what if space debris hits your data center or your radiation panels? Who's fixing that? And then one other thing I was thinking of when I read about it is when I worked for my company Orbital, we built gas stations in space. I think I mentioned that in one of my podcasts early on. And the reason why this is a very viable business model, and Orbital is doing very well today, is satellites die because they run out of fuel, which many people don't know, right? I mean, they are perfectly working in working order, but they need at least a little bit of fuel to stay in the location where they are launched, because there's always gravity in the lower orbit. So wondering what the thought is on that, because you have data centers certainly in the lower orbit. They don't go to you, and you need to figure out how do I fuel them to stay in the location where I want them to stay. So I'm sure they've thought about that as well, but I haven't heard anybody talking about it yet.
No, yeah, and he did mention that all these satellites are in low Earth orbit, and on space debris, he's not that concerned about that because the eventually the space debris deorbits and burns up to nothing anyway. But he was saying these are going to be in a higher orbit. These once they get the data centers, they will operate in a higher orbit, certainly at that size. But in terms of use case, what was interesting was he was saying, okay, because I was like, yeah, but we've still got this lead time for you to solve this problem. How does this remain a viable business? And actually, at the current launch costs, and that's my final video clip, will be specifically about his view on launch costs. But he said right now they have a launch cost that makes commercial use viable to take the existing satellites that are doing things like taking images of things on planet Earth, like a battlefield or shipping lanes, and they then go around the Earth and then they beam down all of the data back down to planet Earth, and all of the kind of insights and processing of that data happens down here. What their concept is to keep the business viable is to have the existing satellites transfer that data existing satellite to StarCloud satellite, and then they will do the inferencing up in space and then only send down to planet Earth the specific insights. Like, you just need to know about which ship just got stuck in the Suez Canal, and it will just send only that insight down to Earth, rather than this giant data package coming down from space to Earth. And he also said, which is really interesting, that there's also it's expensive to get your data that way, because you're taking all of the data and not just part of it. But also, you've got to potentially wait, I think he said half an hour or an hour for the satellite to pass over a base station to download its data. And they can do that pretty much instantly. So there's a really interesting stepping stone there, which is already commercially viable. And let's just listen to the final clip around launch costs, and then we will move on to the bigger kind of subject of AI bubble. But let's listen to Philip on launch costs. It's absolutely fascinating. Here we go.
Yeah, so right now it's about $6,000 a kilo. That is the first business model of providing edge and cloud services to other spacecraft works fine at that price. So that's the initial use case. The break-even point for competing with terrestrial data centers on energy is around $500 a kilo. So about 10x reduction of where we are. The targeted marginal launch cost that SpaceX has for Starship is $10 to $20 a kilo. And they've previously stated they're targeting customer prices of $50 to $100 a kilo. So well within the $500 a kilo range, basically.
You've also got, I presume, some other options. I mean, it looks, let me come off that. So Starship is key. I didn't realize just how key. So to get down to that $10 a kilo, $10 to $20 a kilo launch cost, it requires Starship. And Starship exists, but it's not deployed yet into operation. So currently they are reliant upon Falcon 9, which does successfully land its booster, and it's done hundreds and hundreds of flights. And that current launch cost is $6,000 per kilo. Got this, and then you just realize, and I didn't know too much, until I really looked into this before interviewing Philip. I did not realize the capacity and the step change that Starship represents. Because I'd always kind of thought, yeah, isn't that like the trip to Mars type thing? And probably it is. But actually, I did not realize its commercial uses if SpaceX can get that landing back consistently and put it into commercial operation.
Yeah. So I would be curious to see how many Falcon transports you need to build together a data center, a viable data center up there, because that's where Starship comes in, right? Because of the massive volume it presents to bring stuff up there and launch it. Meanwhile, back on Earth, which we have to deal with for the forthcoming time, I think up to between 4 and 5% of all of the total US energy in the US is now sucked up by data centers. And this is just the beginning. You heard Sam Altman already announcing he wants to build 1 gigawatt per week, which is it's very hard to imagine 1 gigawatt per week in terms of new data centers. And it's even harder to imagine where should all this energy coming from. And Philip mentioned also the water supplies and everything that comes with it, right? Real estate and so on. Yeah, interesting times. We said that many times before, but it gets even more interesting now.
Yeah, it does. So, and then you've got AI bubble. So let's talk about AI bubble, and let me get your perspective first, and then I've kind of prepared what I think it's been building from various sources, data sources, but I think I have my perspective set.
Yeah, and I would be curious to hear your perspective. So my perspective, because my inbox is overflowing with that topic, and everywhere you look, it's mentioned in the top headline. Is it a bubble? Is it not a bubble? Is it comparable to the dot-com bubble in the year 2000, or even the crypto bubble? And I'll come to that back 3 years ago. Interestingly, because I was reading up on that, and again, I was part of the dot-com bubble back in the days where I still worked for a company called SAP. And of course, the height of the dot-com bubble was here in the Silicon Valley. And I remember walking out to my car in the evenings after work, and there were all these headhunters just standing in the parking lot, approaching you. And then, of course, you had people from Webvan and Pets.com, and everybody wanted to headhunt you. And I have to admit, I was laughed at because I still kept with SAP. And everybody thought I'm crazy. And today, SAP, if you even if you ask ChatGPT, is flagged as one of the winners coming out of the bubble. So interesting times. But more interestingly, I saw some statistics. Apparently, a slight majority of investors think we are in a bubble, and a slight majority of CEOs think we are not in a bubble. So it's right. First of all, there's a split in the middle, and then there's a slight different tendency in terms of the investor community versus the business community. And bubble, the definition of bubble is massive invest, which we see clearly there is massive invest in the AI space. Inflated valuations, yes, clearly inflated valuations. If you just look at the stock increases of AI stocks that keep the S&P 500 going, or the GDP growth in the US, which since ChatGPT launched, the vast majority of every growth is in the AI space, then yes, there is definitely massive expectations. But then the question, and that's for every bubble, is what's the path to profitability? And that's how you hear different schools of thought out there from the investor community as well as from the business community. The notes I made is like what I said, 54% of investors believe AI is now in bubble theory territory, which comes from a Forbes report. And then, of course, I mentioned on our last podcast, we talked about the MIT report that came out. There's another one that just came out that said 95% of roughly 300 plus AI developments that they observed are not profitable today, despite $40 billion in spend. So clearly, that's why people think we might be in bubble territory, because there is this massive invest with no path to profitability yet. And then, of course, and we can talk about that. We mentioned it last time already. If you think of what I call circular investment, what Oracle is doing with OpenAI and Nvidia, and we mentioned that last time again, that clearly is a dangerous path. And there were several smart people looking at the Oracle deal with OpenAI and Nvidia, being very, very concerned about these kind of circular investments, which again caused the crypto crash in 2022 when what was his name? Sam Friedman with FTX and Alameda Research, when they did this kind of circular investment.
Yeah, Sam Bankman-Fried.
A lot of people see that comparison or parallel to these kind of things.
Yeah. It's kind of. Look, if I was going to sum up what my view of this whole market is, we're just stupidly early. It's just so early, and I know, what are we, 3 years since the ChatGPT moment when we all first saw that? We're 3 years on from that, and then there wasn't a generative AI market that we knew of. Google obviously had all of their models under wraps at that time. Not many people were that interested in Nvidia, and so look at the change now. And already, like, if I look at my investments, my equities, it was already riding the tech wave all the way through 2010s, right? Was already riding the tech wave, and then we had COVID, and then this thing came along. And so during COVID, you had 10 years of digital transformation in 12 months, if we remember that. And so even the tech companies got even larger and became an even larger chunk of the S&P 500, to which I think the stat I heard earlier when I was taking a look at these was like it's 30% of the S&P 500 is the Mag 7 stocks. But the revenue and the profit numbers are a lot higher than that. But just overall, it feels really early. I love what you said, because I completely agree. When does it not become early, and when does it not become a bubble, is when all of the investment in all the GPUs in this whole market is monetizable by the private sector, by commercial and enterprise. And all the way through doing this year, hosting this podcast and talking to business leaders in different types of business, it's clear that no one is kind of denying, yes, productivity gains are there from the use of AI. But just introducing Microsoft Copilot, it's like me giving you a smartphone. I know it will make you more productive. That seems obvious. But I can't say what percentage of it, we call it FTE, right? Full-time equivalent. What percentage of a person am I making more productive? And a CFO wants to see a Excel spreadsheet with the as-is costs today, all broken down. We're going to introduce the new technology product, and then what are the to-be costs going to be? And then the gap is the return on investment.
Yeah.
Well, you can't do that with either, say, something like a ChatGPT, or lots of big companies have their own variant of a ChatGPT model. Well, you're not going to get a return on investment case. You could make one up, but it's not going to hold any water, because the return on investment case needs to have a really hard, tangible metric against it, which in the outsourcing world was how many less bodies did you need to perform a particular task. And generative AI doesn't necessarily do that. But you kind of know in your heart of hearts, well, if I own a company and I give everyone my version of ChatGPT, will it make everyone a bit more productive? Take some of the sum total of that. Does that compound up for me to have a better market share? Yeah, probably. But you can't put any numbers against it. And that's what I think has happened with the commercial and enterprise sectors outside of the JP Morgans this year with AI adoption?
I 100% agree. We are still early days. It's happening so fast. The space is a bit different if you compare it to the dot-com bubble because the players are different, right? These are not the web-vans and the pet.coms. These are the Googles and the Nvidias and the Microsofts of this world. And AI is delivering real value as we speak, right? So that's a different by itself. The concern is the numbers that are being thrown around, right? Like the CEO of IBM did some accounting examples, right? So he said, I mentioned Sam Altman saying we need to build a gigawatt data center every week. So the IBM CEO argues that costs $80 billion. 1 gigawatt data center, today's price tag, $80 billion. If you do it 100 times, you need $8 trillion in capex. And out of that, 800 million or 800 billion profit is just good enough to pay the interest rate. So the math, the accounting math, for some people who are experts in this, it just doesn't add up. More interestingly, Andrew Ng, one of the leading voices in the AI space, saying he thinks training large language models, model training itself might be in bubble territory, but what's underinvested today is everything around inference, right? This is where the apps come in. This is where the real value come in. That's where the business cases come in. So he thinks there needs to be more investment when it comes to inference. There will be different winners when it comes to the inference space, but investors are very reluctant because they struggle. They struggle today to pick the winners in that space when it comes to inference. And even SAP, Christian Klein made the announcement recently, right, saying we focus on inference because that's where the real value is in terms of application layers, in terms of business case, and in terms of value proposition. So that's still very early. I mean, the whole space is very early, but in terms of the inference, it's still very early. I think in one of our earlier podcasts, I made the argument that 2025 is the year of AI inference. Might be a bit too early. Maybe 2026 is where the breakthrough comes when it comes to inference and creating real value.
Yeah, we're seeing, I think that's a really good point. We're seeing Google launch its TPU, its tensor processing unit, versus GPU. And that causes a huge storm. And Elon doing the same thing with the cars on board. The Teslas are mainly inferencing GPUs. You don't need an H100 for that. And so Nvidia are now, excuse me, and now the whole market's, including Nvidia, but now Nvidia's joined by other players, are moving to inference. And so it's almost like we've had these shocks. And it's almost like if I put my investor hat on, I'm still super bullish on long-term physical AI. Yeah, autonomy and robotics, absolutely, that's what's coming. How long will it take? I don't mind, but I'm not de-investing in that. When I look short-term, hey, what stocks am I in on the AI side? And I look at the shock waves that hit the market. And the first of those, I think, was DeepSeek, which we discussed when it happened. DeepSeek came along and Nvidia dropped down at $88 a share. Absolutely got hammered. You've had the whole tariff tantrums with Trump throughout the year. These shocks have come in. And then you mentioned the financial engineering deals have come in. And to everybody, come on, it looks really like a house of cards and Google doesn't need to do those types of deals, do they? They're just like, hey, we've got this, we can run at a loss for a very long time. And it's almost like Nvidia just growing so big, they're now invested in everything. And then you've got Sam Altman making all these commitments. Where's he going to get his money from? And then the interesting one that I just couldn't understand, Thomas, was Oracle. So I listened to the Oracle earnings results, the earnings call, the last one, a couple of weeks back. And I kind of like didn't even think much of it. I was like, fair enough. The results seemed pretty good. Yeah, the Q&A wasn't too, there was nothing there that was, I really took away as like a massive negative. Next day, market crashes, or not crashes, corrects. And I was like, I had to literally go online and go, what was it in that earnings call that I didn't hear? And it's me not being as astute as I should be, but it's around the financing of their commitments and around those deals, those circular deals that are being done with Nvidia, making people nervous.
Yeah. And again, back to bubble territory, right? And that's a prime example. And again, this is Oracle. This is not Webvan or Pet.com. This is Oracle.
Yeah, sorry.
Which a lot of people think it's doing a strategic overextension right now through that deal. Last time we were on the podcast, they just announced $300 billion deal with OpenAI, and the stock is rising by more than 40%. Meanwhile, it came down and keeps falling because some people did the math, right? So $300 billion OpenAI deal. Oracle needs to buy the GPUs from Nvidia unless they go after Google GPUs. Nevertheless, they need to spend money on that. And meanwhile, in Nvidia itself invests $100 billion in OpenAI. That's what I call circular investment. But some people did the math and now questioning, or OpenAI is losing $12 billion, roughly $12 billion a year as we speak. And then based on this deal with Oracle, they need to pay $60 billion a year starting 2026. How do they do that? How will Oracle ever see any money getting out of that? And meanwhile, Oracle is investing heavily, and that cuts into their profits. So people see a very, very strategic overextension on the side of Oracle and are very concerned. And hence you have these bubble discussions all over the place. And this is just one example.
Yeah, and OpenAI, and maybe we'll also put some meat on the bone here. OpenAI, so they built their ChatGPT thanks to investment from Microsoft. Essentially, Microsoft saying, "Come use our data center technology," and I think they took a 10% stake in the in OpenAI at that point. OpenAI was meant to be not for profit. Then you had the whole, all of a sudden it's changing to be a little bit look like it's for profit when it was meant to be open AI. And so that whole change happened. And then it's almost like OpenAI then does these deals everywhere. I can't believe the loss figure. The running at that loss is huge. And on the one side of OpenAI, they've got Google, and on the other, they've got xAI. These two colossus companies, both of which would like to see the demise of OpenAI. How does that play out for Sam Altman? And Microsoft don't seem to be stepping in to buy OpenAI. And Microsoft are going out of business. So do OpenAI kind of have a Microsoft there also taking a look at them?
Yeah, and on top of that, we have open source, right? None of these examples that we mentioned is open source right now.
Great point.
Chinese market, DeepSeek just overtook Gemini 3 again, right after Gemini 3 was announced by Google. All open source. This will be an interesting space. So where open, on the one hand, you have the open source world. On the other hand, you have the proprietary Silicon Valley giants. We just had an executive order from our President Trump that there's no AI regulation anywhere to be seen. Not even states themselves in the US are allowed now to do any AI regulations. I mean, it's still wild west in a sense out there. And I don't know who picks the winners and who the winners will be next year.
Yeah.
In the coming years. It will be very, very interesting to watch. But getting the money back for investors for what they invested in the likes of Anthropic or OpenAI or xAI, many people don't see that path to return on investment. And on top of that, a very interesting article from the ex-CEO of Intel, Pat Gelsinger, saying, forget GPUs. This is holding the whole AI space back. We need, and it's coming, the breakthrough on quantum computing, and that will change the entire AI industry again and will democratize access to training in inference, and you don't need the GPUs anymore. So we'll see what that space is holding, because a good friend of mine works in the quantum computing space, and they are making massive progress as we speak in that space as well.
Yeah, I did not know that about. I knew of quantum, but I didn't realize that the progress was as advanced as it sounds like it is. So going into 2026, it feels like there's going to be something seismic happen at some point in 2026. I don't think the appetite for AI is going to go away. In my research, I was able to find 5,000 AI agents. So I'm not sure how that works to be a smaller software provider of AI agents. There's going to be a lot of pressure on you to get businesses to adopt those AI agents. But the big players here, they still just seem to be in sort of gearing up mode. And as you said, then you've got these big technology changes, and they're all going to want to adopt those as well. So it feels that I'm super bullish, but I can totally understand the bubble fears.
Yeah. And the fallout in other terms, right? Layoffs everywhere. And some CEOs, unfortunately, also Mark Benioff from Salesforce saying, because of AI, I need less hands. And he got criticized for using that term, I need less hands, laying off 10,000 people because AI and agentic AI will take over in his view. That's the fallout that's already coming and will continue in 2026. And that's what a lot of people fear now, is that it makes it so much harder, specifically for entry level people, to compete and pretty much find a job in the IT industry, because AI might take over.
Yeah, that's really a big concern, isn't it? And there's no sign of any legislation. There's still no plan. We were having this conversation a year ago. There still isn't a plan for how that seismic shift is going to be handled. It's almost like it's the transition from this world to the next world, the next AI agent world. But the AI agents haven't had the uptake. I can totally understand how Amazon and Salesforce and those colossal companies, I can totally understand how they are able to see the automation out of roles. And they've been trying to get those roles automated out for a long time. It's nothing new to them. They've been looking at that all for as long as they've probably existed. But for a sort of regular business, it seems to have reduced the confidence in recruitment.
Yeah.
So if they're like, well, hang on a minute, isn't this AI thing going to do it? Yeah, pull those job requisitions. Let's just not move too quickly. It's almost like it's pulling the job market back before the AI agents are really advanced enough to genuinely be able to remove the need for as many people as there in your business as there are today.
Yeah. And yes, and in addition to that, the gap between everything around AI and the rest of the economy is growing, right? I mean, that's a concern by itself as well. Call it bubble or not bubble, but the fact that we are stalling, at least in the US, but I think also in Europe, on the manufacturing side in terms of economic growth. But everything goes towards AI. All the stock growth is in the AI space. All the GDP growth is in the AI space. And then you see these examples of some people who do the math and don't find the return of invest. So this will all be very interesting to watch in the next year and in the coming year. And I can't pick winners. I don't feel in a position to pick winners on what's happening right now.
Yeah, and look, yeah, we'll wrap up because we're over on time, Thomas. But I think now's the time. Use the AI tools. Consider the dynamics in the market around which job role am I going to go into, which ones am I just going to kind of give a miss. I'm also bullish, conversely, that once we get through a sort of transition period, a whole new bunch of job roles that don't exist today will be formed. We've seen that every major change, industrial revolution, all of that sort of thing, a whole bunch of job roles with .com, a whole bunch of job roles suddenly emerged. But you do need to be really, really careful. How do you be careful? Use AI. Use AI, consider what it would enable you to build as a business. I have to say, as a business owner, it's making spinning up new ideas, new concepts. It makes spinning those types of things up so much easier, having these AI tools. So yeah, there we go,
my
Thomas.
recommendation, this is an important point, right? And we kept saying that, and a lot of voices keep saying that. If AI takes over your job role, there's not much you can do. But if somebody else takes over your job because that person knows AI better than you, there's something you can do to protect yourself. And my recommendation for everybody, and I talk to my kids every day on this, and finally they are getting there, is get your skills up on AI. You need to have you need to be versatile, and you need to be knowledgeable in the AI space. My daughter is an architect. I told her AI will be very important in that space. My son is in the IT industry. He's going to an MIT AI course right now. That's the only way you can protect yourself, and you should protect yourself. You need to be skilled on what's going on in the AI world, no matter which industry, which job. This is absolutely critical.
Yeah, look, I think that's a positive note to end on there, Thomas. So thank you very much for supporting the podcast this year. Got loads of new subscribers as well. So thank you to all our subscribers. And yeah, we'll probably have a break in the podcast for next week. I can't believe it's Christmas next week. So it's probably gonna be a break for a week in the podcast schedule. And then next podcast will be between Christmas and New Year. So look out for that. And then, yeah, lots of new guests and new conversations in the new year. So Thomas, you have a great Christmas, you and yours, and a stunning new year. And I'll see you on the other side of that.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks for inviting me. And happy holidays to you and the audience. And we'll see what interesting things happen next year. And I hope for an invite back, because I know a lot of my people are listening to our episodes and your episodes without me specifically as well. So I hope we can keep the cadence going.
Yeah, for sure.
Holidays for everybody.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Thank you very much. Let's wrap it there. All right. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.